The question I get asked through email most is which paint or which color pencils are best? And as always, I have to disappoint people with an answer that seems evasive, but is so true. There is no best. The very best is the paint or the pencil that you like best for the project you're working on. And sad but true, in that process, another factor to take into account is your budget. The whole world can rave about luminance pencils, but if your budget doesn't even allow the Prismacolors, then it's easy to be left feeling bereft of possibilities. And the truth of the matter is that is just not necessary. One major prejudice that I keep hearing, for example, is that watercolor paint like Cotman and Van Gogh would be second-rate and not worthy of using. And that's simply untrue. I realize that my own super enthusiastic reviews about paints like Horadam, Daniel Smith, and more recently the M. Grahams may give the impression that artist-grade watercolor paint is the way to go or nothing at all. But in reality, such reviews are the result of my own boundless fascination with art supplies, my little and relatively harmless insanity. They do not lay down a truth for any who attempt to venture into art making. Cotman and Van Gogh are excellent watercolor paints, and I know a truckload of professional artists, illustrators, and designers who will still work with these paints today and who refuse to let themselves be crazed into spending tons on highly expensive paints. In the first place, the paint doesn't make the art artist does. Secondly, they do not favour the manual that artist-grade watercolor paints come with, in that they are not as straightforward in handling as student-grade paints. And thirdly, and most importantly, it is simply not that important because these studio-quality paints perform excellently in art. Period. The little swatching and review I'm doing today is an illustration of my point. When my grandfather passed away last fall, we inherited a large box of charisma-coloured pencils. Colorists among you will now hold their breath because these are the Rolls Royces of coloured pencils, and, to make them even more wanted, they are no longer being made. My eyes were drooling over them, but my mom really wanted to have a go with them. I asked her to vow that if she didn't like them, she'd pass them on to me and not sell them. And lo and behold, that is what happened. My mum, who occasionally likes colouring in colouring books, ended up not liking them. Now, I bet that blows some of you off their socks. How can one not like such amazing coloured pencils? The most wanted colour pencils in the world. Well, that's what I mean when I say that it is simply totally irrelevant how good art supplies are considered to be. Your own experience is what determines what's best, and those are just very, very personal. I admit there are limits in this respect. I mean, if you buy 72 colour pencils for $10, you know you're just contributing to a lot of environmental pollution. If something seems too cheap, it is. But as my mum so elegantly illustrated, that doesn't mean we need pencils from the other end of the scale either. But since my mum's experience doesn't make a solid foundation for high recommendation, I want to tell you what happens next. Getting that huge set of charisma pencils made me feel a bit heavy in heart. I wanted my mum to have a replacement that she would love because I really, really want her to be able to enjoy many a quiet moment with an audiobook, some music and a colouring book. You've got to admit that there is nothing in the world more relaxing than that. So I accepted the charismas only if I could buy her a new set of pencils she loved. Yesterday evening she came by to deliver my inheritance and I sat well prepared. I had taken out one of every brand and type of coloured pencil and watercolour pencil that I own. There were more than I thought. I could let her test 13 different pencils. I do not own full sets of each, mind you. Most pencils I just own a few of. We sat down to let her try them all, and I had already calculated a budget, expecting we would end up with Caran d'Ache Pablos, the Faber-Castell Polychromos, or at worst for my piggy bank, the Luminance. I didn't tell my mum anything about the brands beforehand. I wanted her to feel and see which pencil she loved best. And as it happened, it turned out to be a really interesting learning experience for myself because the test didn't go as I'd expected. Pencils she knew she loved were Stabilo green colour pencils, oil-based pencils without toxic ingredients. I'd given her those some time ago and they were a great success. Well, we knew she didn't like the charisma, so we put those aside. But as she was trying my pencil collection, I noticed she kept laying aside the Mercedeses under the colour pencils. Without hesitation, she put aside the Prismacolors and the Polychromases. I held my breath when she tried the luminance, but in one motion, she laid it aside. And even more to my surprise, she held on to a red Stabilo. No matter which pencil she tried after that, the simple Stabilo All was the one for her, and admittedly, it looked the brightest of all in the colouring book that she'd brought. I looked up what sets of the Stabilo All were available and learned they are pencils you can write on anything with, hence the name All. I found my mum's experience reflected in how people raved about those pencils, but unfortunately, these pencils are so special that there are only 8 colours available, along with a few graphite ones. That was a big bummer. Immediately I dashed upstairs to the kids' rooms, asked my daughters for their sets of Stabilo Colour and Stabilo Aquacolor. The Stabilo Colour were immediately discarded by my mum because they were too hard and needed too much work to bring alive on paper. But then came the Aquacolors. I was gobsmacked when I saw how intense those colours were and how easily the colour came off on paper. They were easily as intense and workable as any top-class wax pencil, but the tip was a tad harder and seemed to allow for a bit more detail. By far not as tough as hard oil pencil, but heading in that direction. It was obvious from her reaching out to try more colours that she loved them, as did I. But I was suspicious. How was it possible that I had overlooked these pencils while they'd been right under my nose all this time? Then I realised my mum was trying these pencils on really cheap paper in a cheap colouring book for adults. Ah, that must be it, I thought, and handled her professional quality artist paper. I was deeply convinced that now the Rolls-Royces and Mercedeses would start showing their true colours. But that was not what happened. She tested in a way that I could not see which pencil she was trying, only if they had round or hexagonal barrels. Everything round got discarded, even the Polychromases and the luminance. And then she held the Pablos, or so I thought. She loved them and was immediately fired up for some serious colouring work. But when she lay down, it wasn't a Pablo at all. What she had in her hands was again the Stabilo Aquacolor. It couldn't be. So I dove into the pencils too. I had to find something about those pencils that didn't work so well to justify the huge price difference to the experienced brands. But I couldn't. They layered perfectly. Even when other pencils would no longer show up, they did. They mixed like a charm, and they were as vibrant and as wonderful as one could wish for. Their tips were firm, but not hard to the point where they break. And these pencils give off enormously wonderful colour. One could argue about light fastness, but seriously, only Luminance made that a top issue in their line, and the more affordable Derwent drawing line, but that only comes in a limited range of colours. The rest of the brands doesn't have a full range of light fast pencils either. So if working on commissions or on art that's intended to sell, you might not agree with my findings, but to those I'd like to say, if you're keen on selling your art, you could always opt to use pencils like these and not mind the light fastness. It is hard to find light fast reds, pinks and purples anyway, and simply sell prints of your work. Because in intensity, vibrance, handling and everything, these Aquacolors really were the best pencils on the table, both on the cheap and on professional paper. And as the name suggests, they are watercolor pencils, so they hold the promise of a wider range of possibilities and techniques. Our experience is by no means the truth. We did not try out every technique, and it may well be that for some techniques and some types of paper, the pros under the color pencils are way better. I keep insisting that you must try for yourself what you like best. I highly recommend you buy a few single pencils of a desired brand to try them first. Choose colors you can mix, like a red, a yellow and a blue, and a white to test opacity. But by all means, it is really not necessary at all to only look at the expensive brands. If our experience proves anything, it is that even on a tight budget, you can make art. I very highly recommend these Stabilo Aquacolors to anybody, beginners and advanced artists. I really did not find one single reason why anyone would not love these pencils. And I'm not the only one. I found Harry from Art Gear Guide, who has reviewed practically every pencil on earth, raving enthusiastic about these pencils, not understanding why there hasn't been more praise for them. Well, the reason is obvious. Now that we have so many reviews at hand of art supplies geeks like myself, we tend to go overboard in our appreciation for the exclusive, blinding ourselves for other really good options. And maybe it is becoming as much a status thing as cars are, for example. On second-hand marketplaces, more and more sets of really expensive pencils are dumped after people bought them in a rush after seeing reviews, and then they end up not liking them, with on top of that a sense of burden or guilt for overspending. For people like me, that's heaven, because to be able to get such a practically unused set of loveliness at half the price is a treat, of course. But isn't it actually a super crazy concept when you come to think about it? This is once more a plea for student quality art supplies, and I will keep repeating it. Do not let yourself be fooled by anyone saying that artist quality paints and pencils should be used or nothing at all. And by God, do I hope I never give you that impression. My art supply craze is just that, a silly fascination. The single most important thing is that you make art. And to make art, you need stuff you like making art with and that fits your budget. Test, taste, and trust your own experience in that, because nobody can answer the question which supplies are best better than you can yourself. Thank you very much for listening and watching my review, and below the video you will find the link to Harry's review of the pencils for Art Gear Guide and a few suggestions for really good, affordable, student quality artist supplies. Bye bye.